someone like DJ Moore, he was with the Panthers, now he's with the Bears. I will be curious how many opportunities he gets in Chicago, because in Carolina, he was leading the way in air yard share by a significant margin, not just compared with the rest of the Panthers, but compared with the rest of the NFL.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Professor Edward Egros on the show. He's a professor at Pepperdine University, and he is also a co-host of BetQL Daily. You also might remember him from the work that he's done for this podcast and thepowerrank.com. Among other topics, we talk about his work at the NFL and how it reveals insights into the 2023 season. He gives us a primer on baseball betting, including the types of bets that he's making and the data and the analytics that he looks at. And he also gives us a surprise prediction for the 2023 NFL season. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be three things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. Every Saturday, I send out my curated list of sports betting tips and analytics. As we get closer to football season, I will be providing you with a lot of preview content and the bets that I've been making. To get this free service, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports information through data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Professor Edward Egros. He is a professor at Pepperdine University. He is also featured on BetQL Daily, and he is the sports analytics expert for Bally's Sports. Edward, welcome to the show.
I am looking forward to this, Ed. It is the greatest reunion special in podcast history, and I say that humbly.
Absolutely. It is a little bit of a reunion because, unfortunately, I personally got some sad news last September?
August?
August? Was it August? When you could no longer work with me on things at the Power Rank because you had taken a job with the NFL. And as we get constant headlines about the NFL has some pretty strict gambling rules. So, yeah, let's go back almost about a year now. And Edward, tell us about, your decision to go work with the NFL, how that was, and everything that you've done since.
Certainly. So it was kind of interesting because you move to Los Angeles and you meet all sorts of people and you have contacts of friends of contacts, and you get like 9 degrees of separation. And that's kind of what happened with me in this NFL gig, where one thing led to another. And I was basically having a simple conversation over a couple of lemonades, and I was invited to join the Next Gen Stats team. And it was a really flattering offer to be able to work with some incredibly talented data scientists and to be able to work with some wonderful data. We see Next Gen Stats broadcast over some key NFL games. I mean, the A teams all use Next Gen Stats in some way, shape, or form, and so to have access to the top football games every single week, that was really hard to pass up. And though it required some significant sacrifices, like unfortunately leaving the power rank and doing a lot less in the betting space, it was something that was a little bit different than what I've been doing before. Largely, I was part of the broadcasting world and also doing a lot of writing as well. But this was a different opportunity. Yes, I could still generate some content from an analytics perspective, but also get a deeper dive when it comes to how data scientists in the football realm really work with some of the more polished data out there. And to be able to do that and at least be exposed to it for a season, that was a really intriguing thing, because I think even though I'm more than comfortable with the data resources I have and talking about data and analytics and betting from a high level perspective. I also think it's important to at least have a little bit of experience when it comes to working with other people and working in an organization that deals with this stuff on a day to day basis, where I'm not necessarily generating as much content as I had before. So to have those internal conversations, to say, put together feature modeling, for instance. And so when we're talking about, say, the NFL draft or the NFL combine, what are some things to think about? What variables might be a little bit more important dealing with certain positions? Like, how do you evaluate safety versus cornerback? And what variables matter in terms of determining what makes the best safety versus what makes the best cornerback? To have those conversations instead of just having my own thoughts, opinions, and analysis, and then just putting it out there, TV, radio, whatever it is. I think those conversations were really valuable and I enjoyed them a lot. And again, though it required some sacrifices, it was a good time.
Excellent. On Twitter, you would certainly post the work that you were doing with NFL Next Gen Stats, analyzing different aspects of the game, and I certainly enjoyed that. But from what you're saying, it sounds like more of your work was behind the scenes, and like, were you digging into code in addition to having these conversations?
Certainly working with some code, not as much as others. We had an engineering team that was a lot that I'd say had more code intensive approaches than, say, what I did. I'd say that a lot of my work involved things like, say, on a production level. If you're looking at it from, say, a broadcast perspective, you have your anchors, you have your reporters, and then you have your producers who are writing and editing and things like that. I'd say I was more in a producer kind of role when it came to putting together social media posts. Or one thing that we did a lot of was conversing with the producers who were part of the A teams of NFL broadcasts. And so let's say that Fox has a big Cowboys 49ers game and you have the A team of Kevin Burkhardt and Greg Olson calling the game. Well, we would look up key trends, key facts and statistics, and then we would share those through, say, Slack, and we would tell them what we know. And then sometimes they would use this information, sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes we would listen to what, say, Greg Olson is saying, and then we would tailor our information because he sees something with his own eyes and with his football knowledge. What he would do is showcase what he's seeing, and then maybe we can find trends and statistics to back up what he's saying so that we have an analytical perspective to say, hey, it's not just Greg Olson, shooting from the hip. We actually have data and trends to back these ideas up, and we can further articulate it with key numbers and ideas. So it was something where there was a lot of back and forth. And again, it was a lot more behind the scenes than, say, what I was used to. But again, to appreciate that angle of sports analytics coverage, I think the best way to do that is to actually get your hands dirty and communicate to the booth that way. And it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot doing it.
Awesome. I mean, it really sounds like communication between, I mean, obviously you understand what's going on with the analytics and with your master's degree from Northwestern and what the engineering team is doing. It sounds like your role is more kind of translating that, talking to the people like Greg Olson, who is very analytic savvy, and making that whole process more seamless, right? So you could have the best possible broadcast.
Absolutely. And I think that is a really important lesson that I think anybody, even outside of the sports landscape, can learn is that at the end of the day, we may be absolute geniuses when it comes to understanding whatever data set we're working with, but you have to be able to communicate it at the end of the day. And if that means a data visualization and a key presentation to your bosses, that's fine. If it's talking to your coworkers who are maybe not as analytically savvy, but they understand the domain with which you're working in, that's also important. And then sometimes it's being able to write really good copy or putting together a video presentation like I did for Next Gen Stats, where I had vignettes that would showcase some key trends that could help us understand what matchups we should be looking for in a particular football game. And so a lot of the videos that I would post on social media involve saying, okay, well, against zone coverage, this quarterback does really well. or against, say, cover three defenses, which this particular defense likes to run, this quarterback performs poorly, or these receivers do not handle zone as well as, say, man coverage. And so expect this kind of matchup, or expect these particular players maybe to perform at a much higher level than they already do. And to be able to share those, key findings, that's important. But I think the communication side is one of the more underrated areas, I think, when it comes to this whole analytics landscape. You have to be able to talk on someone else's level. It's not a worse level, it's just a different level. And if you're dealing with, say, someone who played the game, then they're going to understand that game in a different way than if you are attacking it from a data perspective. And so I think it's an incumbent upon us, the data scientists, to be able to sort of change our language to make sure this is something that can be more universally appreciated. And I think the times when we did that well were the times when we had the best next gen stats presentations during football games.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you about the communication aspect. If you are looking to get into sports, doesn't matter whether with a team, whether a broadcast, maybe even, probably even betting with all the content stuff, like you have to be able
Sure.
to communicate with people that don't have your similar background. Edward, with the NFL Next Gen stats, maybe give us a sense for like the data you're working with. I believe it all starts with space and time tracking of every single player on the field, the position of the ball, right? And then everything kind of progresses from there, and you write the code to get the insights. Is that basically correct?
Basically correct. Yes. I sort of look at the foundation of this idea of over expected, where you are looking at various factors like rushing yards over expected. I think is one of the easier concepts to explain, where we know that offensive line play has a great deal to do with how successful a running play is, but the running back still has a skill set that can be isolated in terms of determining how good that particular running back is, regardless of whatever context is going on. So you can look at, say, number of defenders in the box, you can look at the speed of the running back, you can look at so many different factors. And then you can determine, okay, in an average situation, this is how well a running back would perform. Then how well did that running back perform in this particular play? Then you add up all those plays and then you determine rushing yards over expected for a game, a season, whatever it is. And oftentimes you can find some really clear insights as far as, say, which offenses run the ball the best, regardless of who the running back is. This is one of the reasons why we always go back to, say, the Cleveland Browns. And yeah, we love Nick Chubb, and Nick Chubb is a great running back, but that offense in general is designed to put the running back in a position to succeed. And I think in large part with next gen stats, we have a better idea of isolating the key metrics that the running back is responsible for, and then what the rest of the offense is responsible for. And to an extent, that also includes play designers. So over expected is this philosophy of putting together the ideas that help us determine what matters when evaluating a running back versus a rushing offense, which are two different things. And then that is your sort of baseline. And you get that through coordinates from the ball, where everybody is, how many blockers are out there, how many players, where they are positioned. That also matters a great deal. One thing that we looked at a lot involving the passing game is receiving yards over expected. And oftentimes that can be how close the receiver is to the sideline, because sometimes the sideline works as an extra defender. It isn't just one on one, it's one on two. And having those opportunities to be able to isolate what a receiver is responsible for and how difficult catches are, things like that, that's the information that certainly put us in a position to succeed as a group.
Excellent. From that data, is there a running back that has excelled over the past couple years that maybe is flying under the radar that we can expect to continue to excel in the 2023 NFL season?
Well, I mentioned Nick Chubb, and to me, the Browns, no matter who the quarterback is, that rushing attack has always been fantastic, and I don't necessarily expect that to change too much. But if you're asking me about, say, anyone else who's perhaps flying under the radar in a more significant way, one running back I think is flying under the radar is Travis Etienne for the Jaguars. Here is someone who finished second among running backs in rushing yards over expected last season. And he's someone who probably didn't get a whole lot of attention last offseason. He was injured for his rookie campaign. And rightfully so, people were looking at the passing attack under new head coach Doug Peterson and saying this is what the Jaguars will have to be successful with if they are to compete for the division and get a playoff spot, all of that stuff. But the rushing attack is fairly underrated. And I think more eyeballs were on Travis Etienne, say, toward the end of the season. And certainly as the Jaguars were having comfortable leads, rushing the ball a good bit more, that helped. But I think intrinsically, this is a solid rushing attack. And you add to that Trevor Lawrence's passing. And I think this is a more successful offense all the way around than, say, we give it credit for. I mean, we all believe that Trevor Lawrence is at a minimum competent, but this rushing attack is also mighty, mighty good as well. Outside runs, I think especially they were effective. But overall, I think that this Jaguars offense will be something we should be watching carefully because it might be mighty, mighty good for 2023.
Awesome. I will be looking forward to adding a little bit to the Jacksonville Jaguars offense because of that. Edward, I also wanted to clarify it is both the Cleveland Browns offensive line as well as Nick Chubb that is the reason that their rush offense is awesome, right? So Nick Chubb
Sure.
would also excel in terms of expected yards over average.
Absolutely. Yes. It's what Nick Chubb can do by himself. The offensive line is also mighty good, and the play design is also really effective. And all of these factors work together in tandem to put together a fantastic rushing attack.
And it'll be interesting to see what happens, right? Because they have a quarterback that used to be one of the best two quarterbacks in the league not too long ago. Obviously, that hasn't been recent history, right? So it'll be interesting to see whether they kind of change that scheme now that they have Deshaun Watson. What do you think is going to
Certainly.
happen there?
That's a good question. That is the big question, isn't it? And I always believed, like, last offseason was a lot easier to predict to me for the Browns. I was thinking that they would be average or below average because I think the assumption that a quarterback who takes a year and a half off for whatever reason will just come back in and play at a high level. I thought that was a leap of logic. I think it was a lot likelier that he would be average to poor. And look, Jacoby Brissett, I thought played okay in backup work, and I'm glad that he has more opportunities to play in the NFL. I think he's certainly deserved those. And I also think that the Browns defensively, especially when it came to that secondary, left a little to be desired. And so I think the Browns are trending upward. The problem is they are in a very tough division. And no matter what's going on within the confines of your football organization, when you have the likes of the Bengals and the Ravens, and to an extent the Steelers, then
Mm-hmm.
it is going to be an uphill battle no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very tough division there. Edward, you also mentioned that you did this, yards over expected for receivers as well. Off the top of the head, off the top of your head, is there any receiver that kind of stands out from the data analysis that you think could continue into 2023?
Yeah, for sure. As far as receivers who I think can consistently perform at a high level, part of the issue is just opportunity. And, you say look, someone like DJ Moore, he was with the Panthers, now he's with the Bears. I will be curious how many opportunities he gets in Chicago because in Carolina, he was leading the way in air yard share by a significant
Hmm.
margin, not just compared with the rest of the Panthers, but compared with the rest of the NFL. And so I would not be surprised if, say, the Bears design that offense just a little bit more to put more in positions to succeed, even though Chase Claypool is also part of the roster. Now, if you believe the reports that Claypool has perhaps underwhelmed in the offseason, then maybe Moore is going to be more of a focal point of this offense. I don't quite know yet. I don't know how much of that could be, say, smoke screens or something, say, that Claypool can't fix. Maybe he has gotten off to a slow start this offseason, but maybe that picks up. That's certainly a possibility. But as far as receivers, I mean, Justin Jefferson is going to lead the way in terms of
Right.
who should have the highest expectations, no doubt. I will say this too about Jefferson's receiving yards over expected, which he led by a mile over everyone else in football last
Big
year.
shocker.
Yeah, right, exactly. I actually believe, and I'd love your thoughts on this too, Ed, but if ever a receiver were to win NFL Most Valuable Player, I think
Right.
Jefferson is in the best position to do it of anybody, more so than, say, Cooper Kupp from a couple of years ago or any other hotshot receivers we've seen recently. I think Justin Jefferson is in the best position to do that. Besides his raw athletic skills and his unbelievable catches and highlight reel, I think that for a receiver to win that award, first off, like I mentioned before, great athletic talent. But also, too, I think you need to be in an offense where no other receiver is going to take away your catches and your yards. And at least for this season, that's not going to be a problem. As these young guys develop, then maybe it will be. But Justin Jefferson, I think, should lead the league in air yard share in 2023. But also, too, I think you need a quarterback who I don't believe, and I'll put this as diplomatically as I can. I think to have a quarterback that, say, isn't as respected
Yeah.
as other quarterbacks might be with elite receivers, like, Cincinnati's not going to have a receiver be in the MVP race because Joe Burrow is the quarterback. He's going to hog the spotlight, and that's just the way it is. Kirk Cousins will not hog the spotlight in Minnesota. We can look at that offense and say that is all Justin Jefferson, and that's why the Vikings are contending for the division and a playoff spot. We can do that. And so if a receiver wins MVP, Jefferson is in the best position of anyone in recent memory. And to me, that might be a good play there.
I love the idea. My only kind of rebuttal would be then why didn't it happen last year, right? You had all the factors that you mentioned and all the things that I agree with. I do not. Kirk Cousins doesn't get the respect, and that's probably a good thing or an accurate thing, I should say. And Minnesota had a pretty good season last year, right? So if that wasn't enough, I mean, I don't know how he finished in the MVP voting. Like, I definitely like the logic, but I guess why didn't it happen last year? Because he was phenomenal.
Right. Does it also require other quarterbacks to come back down to reality? Like, you don't
Sure.
have a standout like Mahomes basically running away with it.
For sure.
Not just the EPA leader, but he's the EPA leader going away. Probably that other factor is for several quarterbacks to be in contention, not one just making it absolutely obvious who should win the honor. Oftentimes, and this too, we've talked about Heisman many, many times, both in
Yeah.
podcast form and off air, that context matters a great deal. Sometimes a key position can cancel each other out. If you have too many quarterbacks who are of a similar talent, then say a running back can take over, a wide receiver can take over like Devontae Smith did a couple of years ago. That may also need to happen, and
Yeah.
it didn't last year.
It didn't.
But
Yep.
if it does this go round, then Jefferson will be in a really good spot.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, Jalen Hurts was in the conversation for MVP. There's a lot of reasons I think he's going to regress. That entire offense is going to regress. Not so much with Patrick Mahomes. I mean, he's always going to be there, but he certainly didn't have a great season 2 years ago. So yeah, other things definitely have to happen, but I definitely like the idea with Justin Jefferson. I also want to get back to what you were talking about with DJ Moore. This is definitely a player that has excelled no matter who has thrown him the ball over the last couple of years, which I definitely respect. If the Bears don't make him the focal point of the offense, I don't really know what to say. Like, if he doesn't get 200
They have
targets,
bigger problems.
I mean, they probably do have bigger problems. But Carolina had to ship him off to move up to get Bryce Young the first pick in the overall draft. And man, their receiver room is not looking good. Adam Thielen and DJ Chark are kind of competing to be the number one receiver there. I was just looking at it this morning. Thielen's numbers fell off a cliff last year. Not a surprise that Minnesota kind of shipped him out. Chark doesn't invoke anything more than NFL average. So not a lot of resources for the young quarterback there. It could be a rough season.
It could be, but Jonathan Mingo may be someone that you want to back in some way. Rookie numbers are always tricky. I mean, it can be hard to project those, but if he's sort of in that Chris Olave role, like the Saints had last year, then, I mean, look, anytime you get an Ole Miss skill position player, especially in the last couple of years, I think that's only a good thing. And Mingo certainly produced collegiately. He may be someone who can take over this offense. And especially with a quarterback who has no problem slinging it deep, that may be what keeps Carolina competitive in a weak division. It may require a little bit of creativity as far as figuring out who the playmakers are going to be. But I completely agree with you. Those with the biggest names probably will not be the focal points of this offense.
Yeah, absolutely. Edward, let's change gears a little bit. When you were writing Seven Nuggets with me, it was pretty awesome because I always got some great baseball insights. I definitely missed those this year as I've had to actually figure that out myself, which, has been plus minus. But I definitely wanted to pick your brain about baseball, MLB betting. So maybe give us a sense for maybe what you're betting and what kind of analytics tools the cool kids like you are using.
Well, this year has been different than in seasons past. And that's always exciting because I love the problem solving and the critical thinking, right? That's why we get our educations. That's why we have our diplomas, is so that we can utilize every facet of our brain to try and deal with different contexts. And this year has been especially intriguing because of the rule changes. And it's not just the rule changes that get discussed the most, but it's those that aren't as ballyhooed that I think have had just as, if not bigger, impacts. So, for instance, defensive shifts. Yes, they've been talked about a lot, where you must have two infielders on each side of second base. That's fine. The other part of it that I think isn't discussed enough, and MLB.com has detailed it earlier in the season, but I think it's worth revisiting now at the midway point, is that infielders cannot play in the grass. They largely need to be in the dirt. And because of that, if, say, you are a line drive hitter, a line drive specialist, then you can hit a few over infielders that perhaps you couldn't before. And so, especially if you're looking at line drive lefties, for instance, they, for the most part, have had a really good season. Line drive BABIP, I believe, at last check, that's been higher this year than it has in the last few years, especially within the StatCast era since 2015. So you can look at those kinds of trends, say, with the lesser known rule changes, and I still think you can find some betting value. One thing, too, that I've done a good bit is look at total bases for key offensive players. I mentioned this on BetQL Daily on Thursday, that Shohei Ohtani over 1.5 total bases makes a lot of sense. And it's not just because he's hitting a lot of home runs. Certainly that helps. And it's not just that he's had dazzling triples like he did, say, on Wednesday, but also, too, he can beat out ground balls with one of the faster sprint rates among designated hitters, and stealing bases. Even if Ohtani isn't stealing them, he's good at moving over with any kind of contact. That also matters a great deal because you can only have X number of disengagements if you're a pitcher. That matters. And sometimes runners know this and they can be more successful with their steals. And even if the steal rate isn't better because of the disengagements, I think the way in which runners are getting head starts leaving first base, that's also something that's been detailed. I believe Ken Rosenthal had a really great article about how the Yankees have done a better job stealing bases. And so if you can find those power hitters, say, getting at least two bags or more over the course of a game, I think there still is some real value making those approaches. Just a matter of finding the key pitching matchups that you're most comfortable with.
So with total base type bets, it's usually set at 1.5, or was that specific to Otani?
For Otani, it's 1.5. Some can be just a half.
Sure.
I think I saw Mike Trout at over a half for Thursday's particular matchup against the White Sox. And so it just depends upon that particular hitter in that particular situation. But the way Otani has been playing as of late, it's certainly going to be set at 1.5 because he can hit a home run and then he gets the over, or he's really good at those extra base hits and also turning singles into doubles. He's also been really effective at that. You can find those hitters who do that effectively, and then you may be able to find some value.
Right, because he only has to get a single hit, get a single into a double, and he's over, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was looking when back in the olden days when Betscope used to still exist. It was showing a lot of value in hits, and and there were a lot of role players that the hit market was like 1.5, and that seemed like an easy thing to go under, right? Especially like I think I forget which Brave it was, but had a batting average significantly higher than he had in the past couple years. So under 1.5 hit seemed like a pretty good bet. Obviously, you got to lay a lot of juice for some of the players, right, to go under 1.5 hits. But yeah, Edward, I'm trying to get into this baseball prop thing. This is like the benefit of like trying to produce a newsletter every week throughout the year. It makes you think about this. I mean, I've never bet as many NBA props as I have this year. Trying to get into some baseball stuff right now. So, yeah, I'm just trying to get a handle around it. And so total basis. So you would recommend Otani over, but you gave us a little bit of a sense for your process too, because you're looking at the starting pitching, obviously the handedness of the starting pitching, how good that starting pitcher is as well, right?
And another bet that some folks have shared with me is trying to find, say, star pitchers and go under, say, their strikeout props. That's
Okay.
also something that gets brought up a lot because in general in the betting landscape, a lot of the casual bettors don't like to bet on unders because
Yep.
perhaps it feels a little bit sweatier, it's not as much fun, whatever it is. And obviously the market knows this. I'm not breaking news here, but you break things down into, say, strikeout numbers, and there are many ways that, say, star pitchers just don't hit that number, whether their stuff just isn't working effectively, or perhaps it's, say, an older pitcher with the pitch clock. This is also something that has been brought up a lot, but I still think we're discerning what it means. But one trend that has been brought up, and I don't have empirical numbers to back this up, but older pitchers perhaps needed more time to get used to the pitch clock because they didn't have that growing up. But younger pitchers, they did have a pitch clock in the minors. And so being able to throw in less than 20 seconds, that wasn't a problem for them, but it's the older pitchers that had to adjust a little bit. And then also communication with key catchers, whether it's someone they've worked with for a long time or someone they haven't worked with at all. That's also something that's part of that conversation. So if you're doing the deep dives, then that's something to think about. But under strikeout numbers, if say you're looking at a Clayton Kershaw or a Max Scherzer, or Justin Verlander, somebody like that, sometimes you can find some value there.
Awesome, Edward. I really like that you said that because we're sitting here recording this on Thursday. I've been using a tool that a friend built, and I actually don't know exactly what goes into it, but from some spot inspection, it seems like he's getting some pretty good closing line value. I will definitely share this with everyone soon, as soon as I get a chance to talk to him. But I did make a bet, Max Scherzer, I think under 5.5 strikeouts tonight. So I like hearing you say that name, and obviously the logic with the pitch clock also makes a lot of sense as well, right? I mean, Kershaw, Scherzer, these guys have been around a long time.
Exactly. And we also have the stats available to us on Baseball Savant, Fangraphs. They've also chronicled these pitch clock violations and also hitter violations as well. And anytime you can steal a ball or steal a strike, then that matters in terms of what gets thrown
Yeah.
for the next pitch or later in the count. And oftentimes, everything is dictated on the very first pitch. And it's why a lot of hitters like to swing at the first pitch, even though it may not be the most efficient thing in the world. At least if you're making good contact and you get your hit, and that's fine. But if, say, a hitter doesn't do that and you're down a strike, then the pitcher can do all sorts of different things that maybe they couldn't do on a 1-0 count.
Absolutely. Edward, do you feel like you can find a pitcher maybe is kind of run hot with strikeouts over the last couple games, the strikeout total in the market gets inflated a little bit, expect some regression on that, and bet the under? I found that actually worked pretty well in the NBA playoffs. You'd see some really inflated point totals for players like Caleb Martin, and of course, when I recommended it in the newsletter, it lost in the first half for that game. But I continue to bet it, and it when a guy's point total goes from 13.5 to 9.5, yeah, obviously context matters, and you're switching over from the Eastern Conference Finals to the NBA Finals against Denver. But anyways, just the general process, can you make plus EV bets just expecting regression, betting these unders, whether it's NBA points or Major League Baseball strikeouts?
I think so. Part of it is the variance that is inherent to baseball. We just came off of watching Domingo Germán throw the 24th perfect game in Major
Yeah.
League history. His last two starts, he gave up 7 earned runs and 8 earned runs in less than 4 innings each. This is not someone we were expecting to have some quality start right away. Even though it was the A's he went up against,
Right.
it's still not like, yeah, I get the A's are terrible, fine. But I don't believe they're the absolute worst team in baseball, that they're no better than a AA ball club. I won't go that far. You still had major league hitters, and some of them are quite good. Otherwise, we would have had multiple perfect games against Oakland. So let's not go crazy as far as strength of schedule, so to speak. But I do think, though, that Germán was unlikely as far as if anybody was going to break the perfect game or lack of perfect game streak. He's not someone I would have thought of just because his last couple starts were porous. And the Yankees pitching rotation was such that he really shouldn't be there in the first place. It's just that they've had so many injuries that their hand was forced, and Germán basically had to start when he did. And it worked out well for New York here. But I would argue that the Yankees and Yankee fans are much more looking forward to other things aside from just celebrating this one perfect game. So there's natural variance in baseball where that's one extreme example of bad to great. You can go the other direction from great to not so good. Lance Lynn, for instance, is someone who, yeah, he still throws fireballs, but he has been roughed up on several occasions, but he's also had a couple of good starts as well. Blake Snell might be a better example. Here's someone who was part of the Cy Young conversation, and we on BetQL Daily have debated putting him on our list of losers as someone you should not quite automatically fade, but someone you should take with a grain of salt. And he's been dynamite up until, say, that last start against the Pirates. So there is natural variance to baseball pitching. And so, yes, going under strikeouts when the number can be inflated can be really helpful. Also, looking at key numbers like expected FIP, expected fielding independent pitching, for those who want the full name of it.
Yeah, that's important stuff.
Yeah, and looking at that difference compared with, say, ERA. So ERA versus XFIP difference. Maybe that gives you some insight as far as when a pitcher might be due for regression. I like looking at WOBA x WOBA difference. Sometimes that has been helpful for me, and some people don't necessarily like that process, but I do find I get some insight. Don't bet on it blindly, but get the insight and see if you can dig a little bit more deeply. But if your WOBA x WOBA difference is such to where you've been giving up a lot of good contact and they've still been outs, maybe you're due for regression there. And every now and again, I found a pitcher who completely falls off a cliff when I see those big differences.
WOBA is weighted on base average,
Correct.
and then the X is just
Expected.
expected, right? So like a ZiPS or any number of predictions that you can find on Fangraphs.
Yeah,
Is
so
that
xWOBA, basically you're using exit velocity, launch angle, and to an extent sprint speed
got
to
it?
determine the likelihood that something is a single, double, home run versus WOBA, what actually happened.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So again, I mean, it does look like you're kind of looking for regression in certain pitching stats and making bets based on that.
Absolutely.
In your baseball betting, like, do you find yourself betting mostly on money lines or player props? What's kind of the distribution?
Ooh, that's a good question. What is my distribution? I feel like it changes every day. I think depending upon say time of day, I because obviously, lines and totals come out first and then player props come out a little bit later. But depending upon when I can snag something, I think that tends to be what the distribution is. I prefer player props just because like in the NFL, player props tend to be less efficient and it's a slightly less sharp market than your spreads. I think baseball largely works the same way, and so I prefer going that route because I think you can find something with, say, your 6-hole hitter or your bullpen or something that maybe isn't accounted for. But also sometimes like first 5 inning bets can be a lot of fun because sometimes you can filter out the variance that a bullpen naturally offers. Because look, bullpens, especially this year in baseball, they are mightily inconsistent with the pitch clock, with hitters doing all sorts of different things. Um, you used to be able to just throw a bunch of fastballs and then be effective. Now you have to be more creative with your pitch sequence.
Hmm.
And if you're a relief pitcher, that may be a little bit tougher to do. Now, granted, you're only seeing a lineup once through, and so that should give you an advantage. But sometimes you are facing hitters that know how to hit your curveball or they know how to hit your sweeper. And then what are you supposed to do? And especially over the course of a 162 game season, sometimes you're just put in disadvantageous positions. And if you know that going in, then you may be able to capitalize.
Excellent. When you're looking at player props, which ones do you tend to bet? So, I mean, you've talked about strikeouts, you talked about total bases. The only reason I ask is as I'm learning this stuff and I'm flipping through DraftKings, it seems like there's an almost endless number of player bets that you can make. So, just wanted to pick your brain about which type of player props that you look at.
One that I have not bet on too much, but we have coworkers who do, and it's one I really do need to spend some time researching, is stolen bases. Because now we have statistics from Baseball Savant where we can look at, say, catcher pop time, and we can look at how quickly a catcher is able to receive the pitch and then throw to second base. And some catchers are more effective at this than others. And there are other catcher statistics out there that are brand new that can help us determine how quickly and how effectively a catcher can be picking off runners. And if you can find those catchers that are less effective, and especially, say, younger ones who are just getting used to major league pitching and major league environments, and if you also have runners who are faster because sprint speeds are available to us on Baseball Savant, then you can find a good combination. And because it is, I wouldn't call it a newer market, but it's one that isn't discussed as much as, say, hits and home runs and strikeouts, then maybe you can find some value.
Excellent. Edward, let's switch gears back to the NFL. Obviously, with your duties at BetQL Daily, I know you're thinking about the NFL because obviously the NFL is king.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe give us a bold prediction for the 2023 season.
The San Francisco 49ers will go under their win total, and I would not recommend betting on them to win the division. I am souring on the 49ers in large part because I don't know how you can back a team to win, say, 12 games and have a comfortable lead over what I think is a solid Seattle Seahawks team. I don't know how you can back them knowing full well that the quarterback position is an unknown. There is not a large enough sample size with Brock Purdy for me to feel comfortable that he can be the starting quarterback for the entire duration of a season and be effective in every single contest. Yeah, he looked mighty good in a small sample size last year, but there was a reason why he was a seventh round draft. There was a reason why he was Mr. Irrelevant. And I don't want to throw away my priors on Brock Purdy just because of a few games. Yes, Trey Lance could come in and be gangbusters. That is possible. Yes, what we saw from Sam Darnold with Carolina, where he had, at least one or two decent performances. Maybe he handles that offense fairly well with some key playmakers, but we don't know that. And the market is suggesting that the 49ers are likely going to run away with this division, win a lot of games, and compete for the 1 seed in the NFC. And I don't want to do that when the quarterback position is such a big unknown. And the numbers just aren't good at all there. And so, both from a process standpoint and from a quarterback standpoint, I suppose, I am fading the 49ers. Not to mention, schedule matters, right? Because when you play teams and the quality of those teams, that matters in football more than any other sport. And the 49ers have 4 games where they are facing teams coming off of byes. I would not be surprised if they lose, say, 1 or 2 contests against those 4 teams when they were sizable favorites. So there may be a couple of ways to attack this. If you want to go with your futures now and bet the under win total, that's great. But I also think if you can pinpoint those key games facing opponents coming off of byes, then it's possible that those spread bets and maybe even those money line bets could be really profitable.
Excellent. I spent a lot of time last season trying to find a problem with Brock Purdy, and it was difficult. But I agree with you that there was a small sample size of data, and it is very smart not to throw out your prior. I really don't like the term Mr. Relevant. I feel like he's pretty relevant simply because he got drafted, and there's a whole lot of other players that didn't. But yeah, so Purdy's pretty interesting, and it's like they have the low draft capital, pretty good small sample size of data guy in Purdy, and then the exact opposite with third pick in the draft, Trey Lance, that really hasn't shown anything. Obviously, the sample's pretty limited.
It's flawed too. Like, you remember that first game that he played against Chicago, you had
Yeah,
a
it was like
really
the
you had a muddy field where the
yeah
conditions were awful. Like, do you really want to make broad conclusions about a human being based upon really bad conditions? I wouldn't.
yeah exactly. I think if someone were to kind of take the other side of San Francisco, they would say, oh, Kyle Shanahan knows how to get the best out of them. There's a lot of weapons with Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey. What would you think? What would you think about that?
Well, Kyle Shanahan certainly is a top 5 offensive mind in football, no doubt about that. But he's also at stretches in his head coaching career where you're scratching your head going, why aren't they performing at a higher level? I think it's dangerous to succumb to recency bias and just look at the stretch of last season and say, well, Kyle Shanahan's figured it out and Brock Purdy's the guy and everything's going to be just fine. Yeah, you have some key playmakers here, but I would also argue that the 49ers did not have that good of an offseason. Yeah, they got Javon Hargrave, great defensive lineman, great. But they also lost some key guys, like Emmanuel Mosley is one who stands out to me, the cornerback who I believe is now with the Lions. That secondary could have some holes in it. And if the 49ers are stuck playing some high scoring games, you could see them losing them. I don't recall, and I may be dead wrong about this, but I don't recall Brock Purdy being forced into shootouts and then having to win all by himself. I sort of recall him, throwing deeper to wide open targets. That, granted, the play design was unbelievable, but it also felt like that some of those defenses didn't believe that Brock Purdy could play NFL football, and he certainly can. I don't want to take that away from him, but I also don't want to anoint him as the best quarterback in the NFC West. To me, that's Geno Smith. And even though we're also dealing with a small sample size with Geno Smith, which wide receiver group do you trust more? I think Seattle's is much better.
For sure, for sure. One thing I want to say, I feel like San Francisco, every year I say, man, their secondary is terrible. And then injuries happen. And then somehow their secondary, somehow the defense just holds up. I don't know if
Mhm.
that's Robert Saleh and D'Amico Ryans, neither of which are coordinating that defense anymore. I just feel like I've made that argument before and it hasn't quite
Right.
worked. That doesn't mean the argument isn't going to work going into next season, especially since corner play is very volatile.
Mhm.
But that is something that I have said in the past and have been wrong about over the past couple seasons. Let's talk a little bit more about Seattle. Geno Smith obviously had a great season last year. It sounds like you're buying this team.
I am. And I think that's in large part because you look at the rest of the division and the Rams could finish with the worst record. It's not out of the realm of possibilities. And Arizona could very well struggle as well. They have the shortest odds to finish with the worst record in the NFL. And that's not a bet I love, but I understand it. And I think it is a little sharp. But the Rams could also vie for that honor as well. And so by process of elimination, you're dealing with two teams. And look, Geno Smith exceeded expectations last year. You look at, say, his completion percentage over expected per next gen stats last year, he was number one in the NFL. And he completed a lot of throws with a completion probability of less than 25%. Now, part of that involves the receivers he has, but also he was able to thread the needle. And I think what Geno Smith shows us is that a quarterback may need some time to develop, but even after a few years, they can figure it out. They just need to be put in a position to succeed. And I think that the Seahawks are a well run organization, at least on the offensive side of the ball now. And Geno Smith is put in a position to succeed. It wasn't always that way there,
Right.
and it hasn't always been that way for him. But he's someone who has been exposed to enough to where I think his overall quarterback intelligence is up there. And he's got a great receiving core he's working with. Not to mention, you're adding Jackson Smith and Jigba to it, to where if those other two guys go down, you still have a rookie who should be able to perform at a high level. And then the backfield's also really good. Kenneth Walker did some amazing things before he got hurt. He's back now. If this offense can stay relatively healthy, then I would argue that the Seahawks wide receiver core could be the second best in the NFL behind the Dolphins.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about regression for Geno compared to what he did last year, but I feel like I'm willing to give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. I think the other two teams are interesting. You seem kind of down on the Rams. I mean, I feel like they can't contend for worst team in the NFL if Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp are healthy.
Is there a drop off though? I know we've both looked at age curves in the NFL, particularly when it comes to quarterbacks, and I don't know if Stafford has completely fallen off a cliff yet, but
Probably not.
probably not. But injuries are a concern, and
Sure.
Cooper Kupp, has not fallen off a cliff, that's for sure. But who else do they have?
I mean,
This
but who else do you need? I mean, right? Like,
well,
I'm not saying they're going to win the Super Bowl.
right,
I don't see them contending with Arizona, who I want to talk about in a sec. But I just don't
sure,
see them contending with Arizona. All right, let's assume that Aaron Donald's healthy too.
sure. Now
I
he's
just
also someone even before he got hurt, where yeah, like he can take two steps back and he could still be the best edge rusher in
exactly
football. Like that's still
right.
like the gap between first place and second place for a lot of his career was massive. Now that gap, maybe it doesn't exist anymore, but he's still really, really good. So I don't want to take that away from him. But I don't want to just say, okay, if all three of their stars perform at the level we saw during the Super Bowl, and okay, the other 50 guys, obviously they're not of the same caliber. But even if those three guys are performing at a high level, what does that mean? I would argue not very much. And I mentioned before with the 49ers playing 4 games against teams coming off of buys, the Rams have that problem as well. I don't think the scheduling gods gave them any favors either. That's also something to keep in mind.
Very interesting. And then the last thing I want to say, I did some market rankings, which I do every year. Take win totals from the markets, back out a rating. I was kind of surprised that Arizona was by far the worst team in football. I mean, they obviously have the most important position figured out, but it sounds like the rest of the roster is just awful, and like a couple points worse than Houston, awful, right? So, yeah, what is your take on that?
I'm with you. I don't think Arizona is that much worse than everyone else. I think where some of this is coming from is Kyler Murray is clearly not going to start, and we don't know if and when he's going to
Right, right,
return.
right, right.
And
Okay,
so, because you can point to, okay, they've got a backup quarterback, and it's not Taylor Heineke as the backup quarterback, right away we can say, no, Arizona is going to be terrible. I don't think it's that simple. They could finish with a worse record. It's possible, but I would not argue that they are that much worse than everyone else. Houston could very well contend for the worst record in the NFL. The Buccaneers could have the worst record, and that's
Baker Mayfield.
even though the Bucks have some great defensive talent that is part of the Super Bowl run. It's possible that with injuries and some real questions at the quarterback position, the Bucks could have the worst record in the NFL. And so I would not just jump to conclusions and say that Arizona is going to be bad. Win total's 4.5. They could get to 5 or 6. I could
Yeah,
see that happening.
yeah, for sure. Edward, you recently took on a pretty big role over at BetQL Daily. Tell us about what you're doing over there and why you decided to take that position.
So when I was working at Next Gen Stats, as I mentioned before, I learned a heck of a lot, and it was really important, I guess, for my overall professional development to work a little bit more behind the scenes, have this kind of producer role, and work with other data scientists to play a little bit and understand what they do on a regular basis and see what tools they use and what approaches they have that can better my own work. And then all of a sudden, BetQL Daily, a show that I had been on for weekly when I was with FanDuel, I really like the group. Aaron and Joe, they are wonderful, incredibly talented anchors, so to speak, hosts, and it's a group that I worked with a good bit. And so when there was an opening for someone to come in and be a co-host, it was one that I really couldn't pass up. So I applied, did the interviews, all that good stuff, and the combination of the group making it feel like I'm coming back home was definitely a great feeling to have. To be able to do a show every day, yeah, it's a lot of work, a lot of prep work, and not to mention I'm based in Los Angeles and this is a morning show, so I do have to wake up fairly early. But it's something that I really enjoy doing. I get to work from home. I get to avoid LA traffic, and that matters too. But also, I think as much fun as I had with Next Gen Stats, I do enjoy working in other sports. I do have a lot of basketball takes. We talked about baseball before. It's a sport that I really, really love. And I also get into hockey a good bit, especially come Stanley Cup playoff time when I do stuff for Bally Sports West and other places. To me, talking about other sports and seeing if I can borrow lessons and ideas and apply them to other sports and be more universally, I guess, maybe a more universal better is probably the best way to put it. To me, that was something that I didn't want to pass up on either. And so the fact that I am a broadcaster at heart, I'm a data scientist at heart, and someone who loves different sports, not just specializing in one of them, all of those opportunities put together were things that I just couldn't pass up. And so when I was offered the job, it was a very simple decision.
Excellent. Yeah, you guys do a great job over there. I've definitely been listening, trying to get some baseball insights. So definitely, yeah, definitely check Edward out over there. Edward, you're also still working with Bally Sports as their sports analytics expert. Give us a little taste for what you do for them.
Well, we've got a big baseball show coming up for the All-Star break. We'll be out at Morongo Casino out near Palm Springs, and we'll do a big show in terms of recapping the first half of the season, looking ahead to the second half. And so we get to have a little bit of fun with analytics and sabermetrics and projecting how key players and key ball clubs will perform the rest of the stretch. And I think also, too, it's a great opportunity to talk about trends that we have seen and trends that maybe we were and were not expecting. Because again, the rule changes have made for a different sport, and with that can come real opportunities to analyze things in a different way that maybe isn't universally accepted. And so I mentioned before about like line drive hitters and stealing bases and things like that. Sometimes just by having a break, like an all-star break, to kind of take a step back, look at it from a macroscopic view, and then figure out, okay, what's going on in this sport that we see from day to day? Because I think oftentimes when you get caught in the weeds of key series and key matchups, that sometimes you forget about those big trends. It'll be a great opportunity to talk about that. And so we've got that big baseball show coming up. But then also, too, I look at, say, the LA Clippers and the Kings and the Ducks from an analytical perspective. And so I get opportunities, say, to talk about the draft pick that the Ducks just made with Leo Carlson coming on as the number 2 overall pick in this year's NHL draft. What is he going to do for the Ducks as they have a really talented but young core? How does he fit in the grand scheme of things? And so to be able to talk about this stuff from an analytics perspective, it's been a lot of fun, and I'm excited to keep doing it.
Excellent. Do you not do the Lakers?
No, they are on another network.
Got it. Okay. All right. Sorry. The enemy. My bad. Edward, love to end with a couple potentially non-sports questions. Give me an item that's on your bucket list.
An item on a bucket list. So I have an experience
your bucket list.
On my bucket list, mine specifically.
Yeah.
I know that we as data scientists do not want to succumb to recency bias, but I am going to succumb to recency bias.
Awesome.
And one thing that I have wanted to do my whole life that I have yet to do is attend the College World Series. I have been to a college football national championship. I've been to several college football national championship games. I've been to a Final Four, but I have not been to the College World Series. And especially someone like me with my upbringing, it's almost unforgivable at this point. I grew up in South Louisiana in the 90s when LSU baseball was a dynasty, winning 5 national championships from 1991 to 2000. I had to hear about this stuff all the time. And even though I wasn't and still am not an LSU fan, still though the fact that it was talked about like Omaha being this annual pilgrimage, it was something that I really wanted to be a part of at some point, and it just hasn't happened yet. And again, this year, it hasn't happened either. Not to mention, I thought for a while that maybe I would go to Tulane, and so Tulane baseball became really, really good in that time frame as well. You also had other in-state schools get to the College World Series like ULL. And so it's something that was always discussed in May and June. I had just never made that pilgrimage, and it still hasn't happened yet. And just about everybody who's been has said nothing but wonderful things about it. In fact, I just had a friend text me this week saying, hey, next time you go to Omaha, and I didn't tell him there hasn't been a first time yet, but basically said, when you go to Omaha, you have a place to stay. And I'm like, okay, now this trip is even cheaper than I thought it was going to be. I just haven't done it yet. And I'm really, really annoyed with myself that it hasn't happened yet. So as far as like something on my bucket list, I think combines my natural love of sports, especially those that don't get that much attention, combine that with, say, my upbringing within sports as a Southern kiddo. The College World Series is something that I would really love to be a part of.
That is awesome. I've never been to a College World Series, which is kind of a crime because when Rice won it all in whatever year it was definitely one of my best sporting moments in my life. However, I have been to Omaha, and I have been to a game at Rosenblatt where at least they used to play the College World Series, and it was awesome. The whole trip to Omaha was awesome. It was a great ballpark experience. So from that perspective, I highly recommend it. Of course, you're telling me this when, there's 350 45 days until you can actually do this next time.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you can sense the frustration in my voice a little bit more than, say, if you were to ask me this in October.
That'd be good. We'll post a clip of this little segment, like next June, so we can remind you of what your obligations are, or maybe May, since you have to make the plans, right?
I had a friend when Mississippi State won the College World Series a couple years ago. They they found a way to get a plane ticket, and it was, hopping on two different
Yeah.
connecting flights and doing all sorts of random things to get there for the championship series. They did it, and they said it was one of the greatest sports moments of their life. And that, to me, I mean, first off, the dedication is, really commendable, but also too, the fact that it can be done leads me to believe that I have no excuses whatsoever.
Edward, one last question. How about a show, podcast, book, or anything else you want to recommend to us?
So this is a book that, forgive me if I've recommended this book in a lot of other media, but The Changing World Order by Ray Dalio is a book that it's taken a while for me to read because you have a lot of data visualizations and a lot of really dense concepts that take a while to sort of digest. But I think especially now it's an important book as we look at, say, you know, world economic history. It's important to understand that, yes, sometimes you deal with new problems in the world, like how, COVID was something that, yeah, we've had other pandemics in world history before, but there were unique challenges to this one. And so, how does that affect things from an economic perspective? How does that change things as far as like who the superpowers are? That's also really intriguing. Sometimes you can find cycles, and look, when you're dealing in statistics, you're looking for trends, right? And each different data point is going to have its unique context. But trends do matter, and finding those trends can help you better understand what to expect going forward. And there are key cyclical trends when it comes to an empire's rise and its subsequent fall. What are the factors behind, say, why the Roman Empire fell, or why certain East Asian countries, maybe they were very dominant in the economic landscape? What caused them to fall back down to reality? Understanding those concepts, I think, is really important as we reach this tipping point here in America where, yeah, we have some real division. We have some real economic problems that need to be addressed. And one concept in the book that's really important is this idea that for an economy to be supple and to be dynamic and successful, you need to have a strong middle class. And especially when it comes to sports, you can see places where we are losing the middle class. Look at contracts in football teams. If the quarterback position is hogging all of the money, then where can, say, a wide receiver or an edge rusher make theirs? Let's say you're not Aaron Donald, but say you're still a decent edge rusher where you should still have a job in the NFL. Can you still get paid? The running back position, this is being discussed a good bit because you still have talented running backs who are in their late 20s and early 30s that, say, can't find a home. And it's very easy for us as passing aficionados to say that running backs are washed and you want to go after rookies, things like that. But perhaps there is a veteran running back who should still have a place in the NFL somewhere. So this idea that the middle class in key economies, whether it's a country or an industry, that it's starting to fizzle, oftentimes that is a red flag for the overall future success of that industry, that country, whatever it is. So this book has been really, really intriguing as far as articulating the key things that matter to determine what makes for a healthy economy.
Awesome. Changing World Order by Ray Dalio. I feel like in football, you can't really, I don't know. You'd have to almost reinvent the sport. We all know the quarterback's the most important position, right? I don't know how to fix this middle class problem without fundamentally changing the sport.
Exactly, it is challenging. I don't quite know how to do it off the top of my head either. Even though NFL is king, and more money is going to go in and the cap space is going to go up, all of that stuff. But look at, say, rookie quarterbacks who've been successful for their first couple of years. Joe Burrow might be an obvious example, who has performed at a really, really high level. He's going to get paid, and no one's disputing that he should get paid a lot. But then what does that mean for everyone else? Obviously, the Bengals are going to lose players. I mean, that's just the nature of any professional sport. But is it necessarily fair to have one player? And yes, their role matters a great deal more than everyone else. But is it something to where there's almost no middle class anymore because one position is hogging all of the funds? That makes it that much tougher to, and I'm not even talking about team building. I'm just talking about, livelihood, if nothing else. That if there is no middle class, then oftentimes that leads to dangerous things within, say, team building, the state of the NFL, whatever it is.
Absolutely. Edward Egros, thank you so much for your time in coming on this podcast. Please let everyone know where they can find you on the internet. And then I'll also ask you about anything that you're working on that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, for sure. So you can follow me on the socials at Ed with Sports on Twitter and Instagram. And other than that, it is kind of a funny deal where I have a full-time gig at BetQL Daily, and it's one that I really love. And so definitely there are fewer side hustles than perhaps there were. But BetQL Daily, you can find me there on Twitch and YouTube. We always post key highlights of the show there. And then also you can catch me on Bally Sport West, key shows. And then also that stuff gets posted on my Twitter as well.
So there's no secret college football site with EPA per play and that you're hiding from us, like some secret link or anything?
Well, it's a secret, Ed.
Okay,
so,
well.
Yeah. This is
awesome,
publicized,
Edward.
Right?
Thanks again for coming on.
My pleasure, man.
My name is Ed Fang, your host for the Football Analytics Show. Thank you for listening to this conversation with Professor Edward Egros. I thought it was awesome. We got to talk some NFL and a lot of really good insights from Edward. And then we got to talk some baseball betting, which I'm more of a newcomer to, and I really appreciate his passion for the sport. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting email newsletter. Check that out at thepowerrank.com. Once again, my name is Ed Fang. I'm honored to be your host for the Football Analytics Show, and I'm honored that you listened all the way to the end. Have an awesome day, and I will talk to you again soon.